is not clean, so lots of germs.
Okay. Hello. Yo. Okay. Hello, Tân Khao. What's up? Okay. iPad. Boom. Okay. My pin code, you guys can see now.
Sucks. Right, that language sucks.
Mini Jason, hello, welcome to the stream. I hope everything is going alright. Let's see if my stream is okay. Hello, is it okay? The voice clear? Pretty slow. Am I losing frames? No. Hello. Okay. So dark. Alright. I guess it's fine. Not bad. Let me put some color. Brazil. Just one. Is there a color collection? Filter, color collection. It's much better. I think so. Yeah. Yeah, much better. It's much worse, I think. Contrast, brightness. Okay, that's pretty good. Okay, so we're gonna study ecology. Need some water. I hope we can see this, right? Yeah.
There's a lot of bacteria or viruses, so people can get diseases. Okay. Next, water supply. Water supply is very important. It can affect, especially for children. For the please move on. Next is about nutrition. Nutrition, you mentioned already. Nutrition depends on food supply and food distribution. Food supply is a loss of the supply. Okay. Sometimes supply is enough, but the way to distribute is not good enough, so some people can't get good food. Okay. And the last one is about the medical technology. So this one can affect two health conditions. People can live longer or people have short life expectancy depends on these factors. But the most important thing is about education of people. You know that if people get education, they know how to take care of themselves, right? They know how to choose for their health. But if they don't have knowledge, maybe they don't know how to choose for themselves. Next is about the graph. This one we call the age distribution or age structure. Okay. This one tells about the number of people in each group for both female and male. And the population is grouped into three groups: young, middle, and older age. Okay. You are young or middle or older age? Young, Gary. Let's see who I am. So you see three colors of the graph, right? By the age. The group of people is divided by the ability that people can reproduce. The first group is we call pre-reproductive. Pre means before, right? Before people can reproduce, they are young people, they are children, 0 to 14 years. Are you young? No. This shown by the red color. The second group is reproductive age, start from 15 to 44 years. Yellow color. This group people can reproduce, alright? This one mentions only women. And the last group is post-reproductive, blue color. They are over 45 years old. So this group can reproduce only for women. Okay? How do we know the population growth? How do we know? If the country have higher number of children or young people, okay, the country has positive population growth. So from this one, if I put the number of the graph, number 1, 2, 3, and 4, do you think which graph show positive population growth? Which one? If the number of children is higher in the country has positive population growth. So which graph show positive population growth? Number 1. Okay. This group is higher in the country, right? Children. How about number 2? Number 2 is still higher. Okay, but reduced, birth rate reduced compared to number 1. Okay. And number 4, the children is the smallest group. If the children is the smallest group, country has negative population growth. How about stable? Stable is the proportion of pre-reproductive, which is children, is the same as post-reproductive. So we call stable. Okay. What's the difference between graph 1 and 2? Graph both 1 and 2 are positive population growth. Okay. But for 1, birth rate is very high. Right? How do we know? Because the base is very big, very wide. It shows that there are lots of children. Compared to post-reproductive, is less. So people that have long life expectancy compared to GAP2. GAP2, the number of post-reproductive or who are over 45 years old is higher than GAP1. So it means that people can live longer, right? So in each country, the changes of the population it will change from graph 1, which we call stage 1, okay, from graph 1 to graph 2, from graph 2 to 3. So it will change from positive, which is rapid population growth to slow growth. Slow growth birth rate reduce, death rate reduce, but is still positive. Then stable, and after that it will change to negative population growth. Okay. So in every country, the population, the changes of the population will start from graph 1, then move to 2, from 2 to 3, from 3 to 4. This because of economic factor, because of social factors. Economic factors like the cost of living, social factors, culture, tradition, education, especially for education. Education can change the number of people in each group or the birth rate and death rate of TFI. And next is about medical technology. Okay. These are important factors that make changes of the population. In every country it's something like this. Like in Japan, even right now Japan has negative population growth, but in the past the country used to have positive population growth. Like in the past, Japan has about 30 million people, but now the population reduced further. Any question? Do you understand about the changes of the population? Changes of the population, we use the term demographic transition. Demographic transition will change. Okay, this will happen like this. Do you want to watch quickly? No idea. Very sleepy, very lazy today, right? Okay, I have one clip to show you, but this clip is the old clip. The old clips mean the data about the number is not updated. But about the demographic transition or the others, it's okay. I think it can help you to understand about demographic transition. This can produce long time ago.
Never before in history have there been our way of life, or is this prophecy just the sciences flourish and physics
What factors have been included? The announcement of no criteria for human. Basically,
sound species.
okay, I think you get the concept of demographic transition. Any question? Oh, I'm very sleepy. This about the problem we separate from positive and negative population. These are specific problems. Like in Nigeria, what the problems happen? Okay, like shortage of food. Okay, this problem happens for the country that you to have positive population growth. So the government have to control birthday because of this problem. Shortage of food, shortage of all kinds of resources, environmental problems, especially for pollution and species extinction. How does the species extinction happen from the positive population growth? Everyone knows the species extinction, right? For example, some wildlife or living born, they disappear, right? Okay. The most of the species extinct from human, okay, especially when there's positive population growth and overpopulation. How this problem happen? Species extinction. Look what you try and very sleepy. Do you want to do some exercise? No? Want to sleep, right? Do you want to sleep? No? What do you want to do? Study? Wow, yes, good. How does the species extinction happen? By climate change. In the past, there was no climate change, right? 30 years ago. Overhunting, okay, hunting. Okay. But now, species extinction happens from the climate change, which is the biggest cause now. But in the past, it happened because of overhunting, because people destroy their living place, like the forest, right? Because we need the area to build the house, we need the area to do the farms. So this one, a lot of species die. Okay? Political unrest, unemployment, poverty. Okay? Unemployment means no job, no money, no food to eat, and there might be social problem. And the last one is about standards of living. People in the country will have low standards of living. This is why the government have to control birth rates. Okay? What factor people in the country. Do you have high or low standards of living? High or low? Medium. Medium. High or low? Medium? No. High standards of living. How do you know? Because of these factors. In general, there are three factors that used to determine the standards of living: economics, health condition, and education. Okay? Economics is about incomes, like gross national incomes. This used worldwide. The most of countries in this world use GNI as an indicator for standards of living, but Bhutan use gross national happiness. Gross national happiness consists of many factors. So it depends on the country. But anyway, the most of countries use incomes. Okay. The second one is about health condition. Health condition depends on safe drinking water and adequate food. How do we know that people get safe drinking water and adequate food? What is the meaning of safe drinking water? You drink safe drinking water or unsafe drinking water? Safe drinking water, how do you know? How do you know that you drink safe drinking water?
Gross national income, or GNI, is the total amount of money earned by nations, people, and businesses. It is closely related to gross domestic product, or GDP, which is the monetary value of all goods and services a country produces. To calculate GNI, the net income a country receives from overseas is added to GDP. GNI can be higher or lower than GDP. If an American company makes profits in Europe and sends them back home, they will count towards the American GNI, even though the income was not generated in America, but in Europe. In this case, in order to calculate the gross national income, the profits are added to the American GDP, but subtracted from the European GDP. Another example. If Mexican residents move to the United States to work there and send money back to their families in Mexico, they increase the GNI of Mexico, while its GDP remains unchanged. GNI is simply the total amount of money a country actually gets to keep, regardless of where it was earned. It also covers money received from abroad, such as foreign investment and economic development aid. So if a country receives a lot of foreign aid, it's GNI between different populations.
Because you buy it. How do you know? You drink safe drinking water. If you drink like unsafe drinking water, what happens to you? Have you ever drink unsafe drinking water? How do you know that you drink safe drinking water? What is unsafe drinking water? What is unsafe drinking water? If you drink unsafe drinking water, what happens to you? What happens to you? What's the problem? Okay, if every day you drink safe drinking water, right? You know that you drink safe drinking water. But if people drink unsafe drinking water, this unsafe drinking water can cause diseases. For example, everyone know this, right? You have to go to the toilet many times, okay? This is a problem in African country, okay? Because you know by the location, it's difficult to find clean drinking water, okay? And if you watch a documentary movie, you see children in African countries need to have that device, right? When they go anywhere, they bring this what we call purified water device. So they bring it, and then they can get the water. They use that device to purify water for drinking. This is hard to survive, right? And the most of children die from this cause of unsafe drinking water, especially in African countries. The second one is adequate food. What the problem happens from inadequate food? If people can't get adequate food or enough food to eat, what happens, especially for children? What happens to them? Yes, starving. That makes this health problem, which we call malnutrition. Bad nutrition condition, right? And finally, the children will die from diseases. Okay, this is a big problem in developing countries, especially in African countries, because of the location, because the food supply is not enough. So how do we know that people can get safe drinking water and adequate food? There are two health indicators. These are life expectancy and infant mortality. What is life expectancy? Already explained. Life expectancy can tell about lifespans of people, right? But you know, life expectancy, if people can live longer, it means that they are healthy. So they can get clean water to drink, they can get enough food. Like in Japan, okay? Japanese people have very long life expectancy. How long? About 90. How about in Nigeria? I checked last year, I haven't checked for this year. Last year is about 60. The life expectancy in Nigeria is about 60. But life expectancy in Japan, Japanese can live longer life, they can live until they are 90 years old. Do you want to live until you are 90 years old? If you are healthy, you will say, oh yes. But if unhealthy, you say, no, it's very suffer. And the second one, infant mortality rate. Infant mortality rate is the number of deaths of infants per 1,000 live birth. So within every 1,000 live birth means after children born, they have died. How many children die? Infants who are less than 1 year old. If the infant mortality rate is high, people have low quality of life or low standards of living. cannot study anymore, right? Very boring or very tired or very sleepy. Education. It's look at education status of women. The levels of education in women. Why women? Why it cares about women? But you see at the beginning when it talks about reproductive, it mentioned about women. Again, the quality of life of people or standards of living also mentioned about women. Why women? Why? Why? Any idea? You are women? You have any idea? Yes, because not only this, but in general, women in each family, women take care of all members in the family, right? So if women get education, they know how to take care of all family, especially for their children. And in general, if women get high education, at least high school or secondary school, they have a few children, so they can provide quality of life of all children. This is the reason why education for women. I think you need to do some activities, right? Because you are very sleepy. Okay, let's see China. What is it? Those I mentioned about the problem it happened from positive cooperative growth. For China, you know that in the past, in the year 1979, Chinese government launched one-child policy. Actually, before this policy, the government took one-child policy, but it's was not success. Okay, so it can reduce birth rate. And from this policy is estimated to prevent 400 million births. Anyway, in the year 2015, the government changed the policy. They allow the couples to have 2 children. And after they allow the couples to have 2 children, after that, later on in the year 2021, again, the government launched a new policy. They allow the couple to have 3 children. Do you think China has overpopulation? Does the country face overpopulation? Yes, there are about 1.4. Right now it's nearly 1.4, right? The population decline. It's about 1.4 billion people. So the country already faces overpopulation. But why? The government want to increase birth rate. They allow 3 children, mean that they want to increase birth rate. Right? Why? Why? May I am lucky student? May I am the lucky student today when I check the internet? Why? There are 2 questions. The first is why the government have to allow 3 children. And the second question is why does birth rate decline? Why birth rate doesn't rise up?
What's lagging? It's not laggy, right? Is it?
I give you 2 minutes. Then when I check internet, I will ask the lucky student. Is it right? Good, right? If you can answer no internet, try it.
What's up with the line?
Do you know what the question? Alright?
Of using
Or anyone want to volunteer? Answer the question from the class or your friends. Two questions.
For one child person.
There's no more child person. Why they want to have more child?
Because much you have guessed? 55. 55. Thai care cost.
Packet basis.
Because of the achievement, because of Thai care cost.
High.
Thai care cost.
Who want to answer the question? Yes.
Huh? What? Bombastic eyesight? What is this? Bombastic eyesight? Why? And that is funny. Ah, god damn it. Need to go to the toilet. Whoa, that's no good. Yup, it's right here. Is that it? Is that it? No. It's supposed to be here. Yeah. Oops. I think I have a stomach ache. Yeah, I need to poop. Stomach ache. Break, lunchtime, secret. Vertical cam starting soon. Okay. Okay, I'm back.
Because there are lots of old people, right? Good. Thank you, your friend. Okay, because there are lots of old people in the country right now, the government have to make the balancing between children and old people, okay? Because children grow up, they can work, right? They can take care, they can pay the tax for the government, and the government can spend this money to take care of old people. Or in the family, children can help to take care of old people. Let's see, like in many countries will face the same situation as Japan, declining of the population number. Okay. Like you see right now in Japan, there are many houses, but no people live in the house. No people live in the house because reducing of the population. And from the studies found that the number of old people will rise up around the world. You see, in the world, the percent of old people will rise up from 8 to 14% from the year 2008 to compared to 2040. Because people live longer, like they don't die, so this make a lot of old people. These are specific problems which happen for negative population growth, for example, like in Japan or in many countries. What is shortage of labor, shortage of workers? How to solve this problem? Shortage to run the economy. Shortage of workers. Because less number of children. How to solve this problem? How to
ไม่ใช่ อันนี้คือคนกลุ่มยังอันนี้เอาเลยอันนี้ไม่เกี่ยวสิมึงต้องแก้ปัญหาตรงนี้ อันนี้อย่าไปบอกเขามีเยอะแล้วแก้ตรงนี้ดิ
Shortage of labor can affect directly to the economics of the country. Alright? How to solve this problem? How to increase workers in the country? Increase workers is very hard. It takes time. Increase workers takes time. But now the country are facing to shortage of labor. The Prime Minister, what you have to do? The President. salary cannot because human cannot work 24 hours. Invest AI, invest for AI. It's need help from the technology. Some countries now should use the technology. But anyway, the most of countries around immigration. Immigration can increase income, right? And at the same time, the government can earn more tax. Can earn more tax from workers. The government can increase income, okay? The second one, high dependent ratio of overaging population. So how to solve this problem? There are lots of old people. How can the government take care of old people? Many ways. What are they?
มันมีเทคแคร์คนแก่
How can the government take care of old people?
ก็
Old people face a lot of responsibility for their life, right? What the problems of old people?
ไปเวทีก็คือให้ตังค์เลย
Health problems. Not every old people are healthy. The most of them are unhealthy, right? They need a lot of medicine. They need someone to take care of them. Who gonna take care of old people? Who can take care of old people? Any old people in your family? Yes, how many? One. Is it easy to take care of old people? Not easy. Oh, good. Lucky, how lucky you are. How to solve the problem? A lot of old people in the country like in Japan. If you can answer the question, I will repeat the class. What's the question? How to solve the problem about old people? Once there are lots of old people in the country. How to make everyone get like a good care? How make everyone get good health care? And how tell them to earn money
กูฆ่ากูบอก
if they are healthy. And increase retirement age. Alright, okay. This policy used in many countries, right? In sense of retirement age is 65 years old, the government can increase or extend to 68 or 70 or over than this. Okay. Who are old people? How old are they? Old people. How old?
65
WHO define 65. In the past, long time ago, it was 60, but now it's 65. In the future, it may increase to 70 because a lot of old people. What else? The first is extend or increase the retirement age for old people, like from 65 to 68 or to 70, so they can earn money, right? And they can, when they work, they can exercise, they have to walk, maintain their health. What else? What else? Have you ever seen like old people work in the company? Like when you buy anything in the department store, old people work in the company. So the government can ask private sector to find old people to work in the company. Okay? If people are healthy, how about unhealthy old people? Unhealthy. Healthy old people is okay. Okay. How about unhealthy old people? If they are unhealthy, how to provide care for old people? Huh? My student told me kill them. If they are unhealthy,
exercise
if they are unhealthy, how to unhealthy old people. For example, like you know Alzheimer. If people has Alzheimer, what happened to them?
They'll forgot everything.
Yes.
For unhealthy people, they also have to visit when they are work.
Yes.
The policy, I think they should return the tax by giving good health service to them.
Oh, yes, the idea. But you know that after COVID-19, government has no money. Someone the government have little money. Okay, this is the idea. If the government have money, right, they can spend money to afford. But if they can't afford, how the society help? Do you have a chance to get Alzheimer? Yes. Why? Everyone has a chance to get Alzheimer when they are getting old, right? You know that one thing is about pollution. Now, from the study is found that pollution like PM2.5 can affect to the brain. And finally, we may have Alzheimer. Especially for those who always use the phone. Because you don't think anything, right? You just slide your phone. And how to? Can anyone answer? If you can answer, I will reach me the class. Please. Help me, please. Help me, please. Are you homework? No. Oh, you want to have free time for holidays? Yes. So answer the question, please. This policy implemented use in many countries. The government asks people in the country to help, but how to? It's free. People have don't need to pay anything for both. The nursing home they have to pay. Charity home of people and then yes, right. This policy launched in many countries. The first country is in Europe. Okay. They just decide and they have like the charity for people. Like if you are young people, right? When you are free, right? This you will get it. So implement in many countries also in Thailand take care of you. Okay. You see one problem is right now people have no family, right? Developed countries and now you understand anything, right? But you awareness can come from.
Or some know how to use. Okay, we're just going to dig deeper. The multiplication of standard deviation of x and standard deviation of y, you will see that the units all cancel out. Right? So imagine.
Sort by pitching order.
ย่อๆสั้นๆเป็นคอนเซ็ปต์ง่ายๆก่อนการทำงานปกติแล้วเนี่ยครับระหว่าง client กับ server เนี่ยจากด้านซ้ายเนี่ยฝั่ง client จะทำ
links to the server, that extra time.
cat can't do stats in the window. So I'll do stats for her all day long. StatQuest. Hello, I'm Josh Starmer and welcome to StatQuest. Today we're going to talk about covariance, and this is part 1 in a 2-part series on covariance and correlation. Note, this StatQuest assumes that you are already familiar with the concept of variance. If not, check out the quest. The link is in the description below. In the StatQuest on variance, we started with the number of mRNA transcripts for gene X from 5 different cells. And if mRNA transcripts aren't your thing, you could think that we counted the number of green apples in 5 different grocery stores. Then we estimated the mean, X bar. And then we estimated the variance. Bam. And that's our review of variance. Now imagine that in addition to counting mRNA transcripts for gene X, we also counted gene Y transcripts in the same 5 cells. Alternatively, you can imagine we counted the number of red apples in the same 5 grocery stores. Note, if you're wondering why gene Y is perpendicular to gene X, don't sweat it. The reason will become clear in just a bit. Anyway, just like we did for gene X, we can estimate the mean for gene Y. And since gene Y is on the y-axis, we will use Y bar to represent its mean value. And we can estimate the variance. Bam. So far, we've estimated the mean and variance for 2 different genes measured in the same 5 cells. Alternatively, you could imagine we estimated the mean and variance for 2 different types of apples counted in the same 5 grocery stores. Since these measurements were taken from the same cells or the same grocery stores, we can look at them in pairs. For example, this pair of measurements came from the same cell, and both measurements are less than their respective mean values. This pair of measurements came from another cell, and both measurements are greater than their respective mean values. Since the measurements were taken in pairs, the question is, do the measurements, taken as pairs, tell us something that the individual measurements do not? Covariance is one way to try to answer this question. Since the measurements came from the same cells or grocery stores, we can plot each pair as a single dot by combining the values on the X and Y axes. Try to answer this question. Since the measurements came from the same cells or grocery stores, we can plot each pair as a single dot by combining the values on the X and Y axes. Now, generally speaking, we see that cells with relatively low values for gene X also have relatively low values for gene Y. And cells with relatively high values for gene X also have relatively high values for gene Y. This relationship, low measurements for both genes in some cells and high measurements for both genes in other cells, can be summarized with this line. Note, the line that represents this particular relationship has a positive slope, and it reflects the positive trend where the values for gene X and gene Y increase together. In other words, if you told me that there were a lot of transcripts for gene X in a cell, then the trend suggests that the same cell should have a large number of transcripts for gene Y. Likewise, if you told me that you had a low value for gene Y, then the trend suggests that the same cell should have a small number of transcripts for gene X. If the data had looked like this, and relatively low values for gene X corresponded with relatively high values for gene Y, and relatively high values for gene X corresponded with relatively low values for gene Y, then the relationship would have a negative slope and reflect the negative trend that the values for gene X increase as the values for gene Y decrease. If the data had looked like this, and every value for gene X was paired with the same value for gene Y, then there would be no trend, positive or negative, between gene X and gene Y. This is because if you told me that you got the same measurement for gene Y found in all of the other cells, then we would not know if the same cell should have a relatively small value for gene X, or a relatively large value, or any other value. Likewise, if every value for gene Y was paired with the same value for gene X, there would be no relationship. This is because if you told me that you got the same measurement for gene X found in all of the other cells, then we would not know if the same cell should have a relatively small value for gene Y, or a relatively large value, or any other value. The main idea behind covariance is that it can classify three types of relationships. 1. Relationships with positive trends. 2. Relationships with negative trends. And 3. Times when there is no relationship because there is no trend. Okay, we just covered the main idea behind covariance. It's so important that I'm going to repeat it. Covariance can classify these three types of relationships. 1. Relationships with positive trends. 2. Relationships with negative trends. And 3. Times when there is no relationship because there is no trend. Bam! The other main idea behind covariance is kind of a bummer. Covariance, in and of itself, is not very interesting. What I mean by this is that you will never calculate covariance and be done for the day. Instead, covariance is a computational stepping stone to something that is interesting, like correlation. Because I like repeating myself, let me repeat the second main idea behind covariance. Covariance is a computational stepping stone to something that is interesting, like correlation. So let's talk about how covariance is calculated. Covariance is calculated with a slightly nasty looking thing. To get an intuitive sense for how covariance is calculated, let's go back to the mean value for gene X and extend the green line to the top of the graph. And then extend the red line that represents the mean for gene Y to the edge of the graph. Now let's focus on the leftmost data point. Since it's to the left of the solid green line, we see that it is less than the mean value for gene X. And since it is below the solid red line, we see that it is less than the mean value for gene Y. Now let's plug in the gene X measurement for this cell and the mean value for gene X. And that gives us this difference, which is negative since it is to the left of the mean. Now let's plug in the gene Y measurement for this same cell and the mean value for gene Y. And that gives us this difference, which is negative because it is below the mean. And since both differences are negative, multiplying them together gives us a positive value. Now we do the same thing for the next data point. Again, since it is to the left of the solid green line, we can see that it is less than the mean for gene X. And since it is below the solid red line, we can see that it is less than the mean for gene Y. So we plug in the values for gene X and that gives us a negative difference. Now we plug in the values for gene Y, and that gives us another negative difference. Again, since both differences are negative, multiplying them together gives us a positive value. So we see that when the values for gene X and gene Y are both less than their respective averages, we end up with positive values. Bam! The remaining 3 cells are to the right of the solid green line, so we see that they are all greater than the average value for gene X. And they are all above the solid red line, so we see that they are also greater than the average value for gene Y. Thus, when we plug in the values and do the math, we end up with positive values. Doing the math, I'm doing the math. Hip hip hooray, I'm doing the math. Hip hip hooray, hip hip hooray. So we see that when both values are greater than their respective means, we end up with positive numbers. In summary, data in these 2 quadrants contribute positive values to the total covariance. Bam! Hooray! We've calculated these terms for each cell. The sigma tells us to add up each term. And then we divide by the number of measurements n, which in this case is 5, minus 1. And ultimately, we end up with a covariance equal to 116. Since the covariance value, 116, is positive, it means that the slope of the relationship between gene X and gene Y is positive. In other words, when the covariance value is positive, we classify the trend as positive. Double bam! Note, the covariance value itself isn't very easy to interpret and depends on the context. For example, the covariance value does not tell us if the slope of the line representing the relationship is steep or not steep. It just tells us that the slope is positive. More importantly, the covariance value doesn't tell us if the points are relatively close to the dotted line or relatively far from the dotted line. Again, it just tells us that the slope of the relationship is positive. Note, we'll talk about why the covariance value is so hard to interpret later. And remember, even though covariance is hard to interpret, it is a computational stepping stone to more interesting things. Bam. Now let's imagine and we got different values for gene Y. Just like before, we can graph the data using pairs of X and Y axis values. The mean value for gene X is the same as before, 17.6. And the mean value for gene Y is 20.2. Now let's focus on the data point on the far left. Since the measurement for gene X is to the left of the solid green line, we can see that it is less than the mean value. However, the measurement for gene Y is above the solid red line, so we see that it is greater than the mean value. Thus, when we end up with a negative number. So, if one value is less than its mean and one value is more than its mean, we end up with a negative number. Bam! Likewise, these cells also result in negative numbers because they are greater than gene X's mean and less than gene Y's mean. In summary, data in these quadrants contribute negative values to the covariance. Now we add up each term, and then we divide by the number of measurements n, which is 5 minus 1. And ultimately, we end up with a covariance equal to negative 105.15. Since the covariance value, negative 105.15, is negative, it means that the slope of the relationship between gene X and gene Y is negative. Again, covariance doesn't tell us if the slope is steep or not. And, more importantly, covariance doesn't tell us if the points are relatively close to the line or relatively far, just that the slope is negative. Bam. Now let's calculate the covariance for when there is no trend. In this case, every value for gene X corresponds to the same value for gene Y. First, we calculate the means. Then we do the math for the first point. The difference from gene X's average is negative 14.6. And the difference from gene Y's average is 0. And anything times 0 is 0. So the value for the first data point is 0. Likewise, because the differences between the gene Y values and the gene Y average are all 0, all of the remaining terms are 0. Doing the rest of the math gives us 0 in the numerator, and the whole thing equals 0. Likewise, when every value for gene Y corresponds to the same value for gene X, the covariance equals 0. In this last case, we can see that, even though there are multiple values for gene X and Y, there is still no trend because as gene X increases, gene Y increases and decreases. In other words, the negative value for this point is canceled out by this positive point. And this positive point is canceled out by this negative point. And the covariance equals 0. So we see that the covariance equals 0 when there is no relationship between gene X and gene Y. Double bam! Gene X and gene Y. Double bam! Now let's talk about why the covariance value is hard to interpret. To see why the covariance value is difficult to interpret, let's go all the way back to looking at just gene X and calculate the covariance between gene X and itself. Just like before, we can plot the data. And the mean value for gene X is the same as before, 17.6. And we use 17.6 on the y-axis as well. Now we are ready to calculate the covariance. Note, in this case, the same data are on both axes, and that means x equals y and x bar equals y bar. So we can replace y with x and multiply. When we do the multiply the data by right are twice what they were before. But the relative positions of the data did not change. And each dot still falls on the same straight line with positive slope. In other words, the only thing that changed was the scale that the data is on. However, when we do the math, we get covariance equals 408, which is 4 times what we got before. Thus, we see that the covariance value changes even when the relationship does not. In other words, covariance values are sensitive to the scale of the data, and this makes them difficult to interpret. This sensitivity to scale also prevents the covariance value from telling us if the data are close to the dotted line that represents the relationship or far from it. In this example, the covariance on the left, when each point is on the dotted line, is 102. And the covariance on the right, when the data are relatively far from the dotted line, is 300 points. In other words, covariance values are sensitive to the scale of the data, and this makes them difficult to interpret. This sensitivity to scale also prevents the covariance value from telling us if the data are close to the dotted line that represents the relationship or far from it. In this example, the covariance on the left, when each point is on the dotted line, is 102. And the covariance on the right, when the data are relatively far from the dotted line, is 381. So, in this case, when the data are far from the line, the covariance is larger. Now let's just change the scale on the right-hand side and recalculate the covariance. And now the covariance is less for the data that does not fall on the line. If you're thinking, I sure wish there was something to describe relationships that wasn't sensitive to the scale of the data, then you're in luck. Calculating covariance is the first step in calculating correlation. Correlation describes relationships and is not sensitive to the scale of the data. And we'll talk about correlation more in the next video in this series. It's also worth mentioning that covariance values are used as stepping stones in a wide variety of analyses. For example, covariance values were used for principal component analysis, PCA, and are still used in other settings as computational stepping stones to other, more interesting things. Bam! In summary, covariance is a way to classify three types of covariance and notable to interpret. However, it is useful for calculating. We've made it to the end of another exciting stat quest. If you like this, step correlation, it's the sensation across the nation. Stat quest. Hello, I'm Josh Starmer and welcome to StatQuest. Today is part 2 in our series on covariance and correlation. This time we're going to talk about correlation. However, before we dive deep into correlation, I want to talk about relationships. Not the fun and/or confusing kind we sometimes find ourselves in. Will you hold my hand?
You don't have a hand. You're just a stick figure.
Dang. Instead, I want to talk about the relationships between data on the x-axis and data on the y-axis. In this example, we're looking at
Stick figure.
find ourselves in. Will you hold my hand?
You don't have a hand. You're just a stick figure.
Dang. Instead, I want to talk about the relationships between data on the x-axis and data on the y-axis. In this example, we're looking at mRNA transcripts from gene X in 5 different cells on the x-axis and from gene Y in the same 5 different cells on the y-axis. However, if mRNA transcripts doesn't mean anything to you, imagine we went into 5 different grocery stores and put the number of green apples on the x-axis and the number of red apples on the y-axis. Each pair of measurements were taken from a single cell or grocery store and can be represented by a blue dot. We can see that, in general, relatively low values for gene X are paired with relatively low values for gene Y, and relatively high values for gene X are paired with relatively high values for gene Y. We can use a straight line with a positive slope to represent this trend. And if someone told us that they collected a new measurement for gene X, 20, then we can use the line to predict that when gene X equals 20, then the value for gene Y should be somewhere around 27. Alternatively, if someone gave us a value for gene Y, we could use the trend to predict a range of values for gene X. In both cases, we made guesses based on the trend we observed in the data. If the data were closer to the trend line, then, given a gene X value, we might guess that the value for gene Y falls in a smaller range. In this case, the closer the data are to the line, the more gene X can tell us about gene Y. Alternatively, we could say that the relationship between gene X and gene Y is relatively strong. If the data were Alternatively, we could say that the relationship between gene X and gene Y is relatively strong. If the data were further from the trend line, then we might guess that the value for gene Y falls in a larger range. In this case, we could say that the values for gene X tell us less about the values for gene Y. Alternatively, we could say that the relationship between gene X and gene Y is relatively weak. Note, just to be clear, all we are saying is that we observed that low values for gene X tend to be paired with low values for gene Y, and that high values for gene X tend to be paired with relatively high values for gene Y, and that this observation suggests a trend that we can use to make predictions and inferences, aka educated guesses. We are not saying that a low value for gene X causes gene Y to have a low value, or that a high value for gene Y causes gene X to have a high value. In other words, we are not ruling out the possibility that something else causes the trend that we observe. Small bam. So far, we have looked at a relatively weak relationship and a relatively strong relationship. We can quantify the strength of a relationship with correlation. In other words, these data with a relatively weak relationship have a small correlation value. These data with a moderate relationship have a moderate correlation value. And these data with a strong relationship have a relatively large correlation value. The maximum have a relatively large correlation value. The maximum value for correlation is 1. Correlation equals 1 when a straight line with a positive slope can go through the center of every data point. This means that if someone gave us a center of every x, then we could guess that gene y had a value in a very, very narrow range. Note, correlation does not depend on the scale of the data. In fact, I intentionally omitted putting numbers on the axes because they do not affect correlation at all. In other words, regardless of the scale of the data, correlation equals 1 when a straight line with a positive slope can go through all of the data. That means that correlation can equal 1 when the slope is large and when the slope is small. Note, when a straight line with a positive slope goes through the data, correlation equals 1 regardless of how much data we have.
Print screen? What the fuck? Oh, Striker, you didn't sleep? It's late. Print screen, Command Shift 4? No, but it's the, it's good notes and I want to use like this. Can you see? Yeah, so I take a photo and put it. Ow, notes. Are you tired? You look tired in the in Discord. I mean, just remember, right? I can't. Have you ever learned this? Like, do you know correlation? There's correlation and there's covariance. Something. Oh, I should flip this, right? So that God damn it. I should flip my OBS, right? This, you won't see it correct. Let's say this stuff I see. I should flip so that you can see. Or am I being rotate 180, right? Yep. Is it better? I guess, so that you can read like this. Wait, no. That's stupid. Wait, is it? No, I think it's better, right? Hand cam is pointless for reading. Oh, but at least you can see what is going on, right? Yeah, I think this is better than the previous one, but still you pointless. Yeah. Yep. So yeah, we are doing this, and this is math and statistics for data science. And the teacher got mad for some reason. What was it here? Thanks to a number of your friends. Yeah, he got mad. Is it even cheating? Yeah, but I mean, it's not even legal, right? But it happens all over the world, so Yeah. Maybe it's like because I think I know why. My suspicion is that when we have to submit our assignment, right, in the class, and so my suspicion is that like when they submit the work, I think it's this one, right? No, workshop. Yeah, so he'll upload like this. Do your exercise, take a photo or something. I think some people just took this file from his friend and just put it, and then I think he recognized it like this, and then he just changed the name, but the handwriting and other things are just same. So that's why I think he's mad about it. Yeah. But there's no way that he will know. There's no way he will know that we copied this from someone, because it's basically the same formula. It's no way. Just same. You can only do this way to get the answer. There's no other way. But apparently, I think someone just asked the PDF from his friend and uploaded. Yeah.
For example, if we only had 2 data points, then we can draw a straight line with a positive slope by just connecting the 2 dots. And then correlation equals 1, and that makes the relationship appear strong. But we should not have any confidence in predictions made with this line, because we have so little data. To understand why we should have low confidence in correlations made with small data sets, let's start with an empty graph and draw 2 random points on it. Then, just like before, we could draw a straight line that goes through the center of each point just by connecting the dots. And that means correlation equals 1 for these 2 randomly drawn dots. In fact, we can always draw a straight line between any 2 random dots. Now let's go back to the original data and imagine that instead of 2 pairs of measurements, we had 3 pairs of measurements. Now, just like before, since we can draw a straight line through all 3 points, correlation equals 1. However, now we can have more confidence in the predictions we make with this line. This is because if we started with an empty graph and drew 3 random points on it, then empty
Statistics this nuts.
graph and drew 3 random, this is more confidence in an empty graph and drew 3 random points on it, then even though it's easy to draw a straight line to connect any 2 points, there is a very small chance that we will be able to draw a straight line through all 3 points. Ultimately, the probability that we can connect 3 randomly drawn points with a straight line is very small. And thus, we can have more confidence that the observed correlation isn't just the result of random chance.
Yeah, that makes sense. So more data you have, more data point you have equals to more accurate prediction. I think this is common sense. Yeah. So yeah. Learning about drawing lines. Why are you boring your chat? I mean, it's boring, but you gotta do what you have to do. It's just You have to learn this. But yeah. To be honest, for me, it's not that boring, but it's just like I'm learning new things. It's probably boring for you because you already knew. That's why. But I don't know. Yeah. Start learning a drawing line. It's called correlation. Correlation, yeah. So it's just fundamental for data science. Once you do some data science things, you have to know this stuff. That's why I'm learning.
In general, the more data we have, the more confidence we have in the predictions we make with the line.
Yay!
Because the probability that we can draw a straight line through the same number of randomly placed points gets smaller and smaller with each additional point. Note, we could draw a squiggly line that connects all of the dots. But when we're talking about correlation, we're only talking about using straight lines. Oh no, it's the dreaded terminology alert. For correlation, a p-value tells us the probability that randomly drawn dots will result in a similarly strong relationship or stronger. Thus, the smaller the p-value, the more confidence we have in the predictions we make with the line. In this case, the p-value is crazy small, 2.2 times 10 to the negative 16.
Do lead code is boring too, but more useful. Lead code. There's a website called Edabet, and this one is a good website. Edabet. Yeah. Yeah, Python. Yeah, so. It's a good website.
Which means that the probability of random data creating a similarly strong or stronger relationship is crazy small. To summarize what we've talked about so far, the maximum value for correlation, 1, occurs whenever you can draw a straight line with a positive slope that goes through all of the data. And our confidence in how useful the relationship is depends on how much data we have. Of these 3 examples, we should have the least confidence in this relationship since it is supported by the least amount of data. And we should have the most confidence in this relationship since it is supported by the most data and has the smallest p-value.
What is p-value? How did he say to calculate p-value? Terminology alert. For correlation, a p-value tells us the probability that a random drawn dots will result in. But how do you calculate? Yeah, p-value. Trust the smaller the p-value, more confidence. Okay. In this case, the p-value is crazy small. But how did you know? Okay, so I don't know how did he calculate, but the thing is, if you have small p-value is small, that means that
Data.
do you solve lead code? No, I don't. Equals to more confidence in prediction. I'm more like making projects and stuff than lead code. Yeah. But I play Clash of I nearly said Clash of Clan, but it's Clash of Code. Clash of Clan is a game in mobile tablet. I think you have heard of it, right? Except Strager, because Strager is, in mid-40s already, so he might not be, he might don't know. So, but the Clash of Code is an online game where it's like lead code. You solve problem like lead code, but with multiplayer. It's much funner, more competitive. Some question are shit, by the way, in the Clash of Code, but you could report them. Okay, take a look at this one. I think you might like it if you like solving lead code problems. Oh, you mean, yeah, solving in a room. So for example, let's try. I join a clash, right? So it's like this. So you're in a room, and then you wait for a bunch of friends. I'll demonstrate.
Quest breaks, the more confidence we have in the predictions we make with the line. In this case, the p-value is crazy small, 2.2 times 10 to the negative 16, which means that the probability of random data creating a similarly strong or stronger relationship is crazy small.
It's crazy small.
To summarize what we've talked about so far, we have, and in this we should have, and has the, when a straight line with a negative slope can go through the center of every data point, then the correlation equals -1. Since a straight line can go through all of the data points, correlation equals -1 implies that there is a strong relationship in the data. And if someone gives us a value for gene X, then we can guess a value for gene Y within a very narrow range. Just like before, our confidence in that guess, which we quantify with a p-value, depends on how much data we have. If we had a lot of data, we could have a lot of confidence in the guess because the p-value would be super small. And the less data we have, the less confidence we have in the guess because the p-value gets larger. Just like before, as long as a straight line goes through all of the data and the slope of the line is negative, correlation equals -1 when the slope is large and when the slope is small.
So so there's a room, and then what happened is, and then you code here. So this is fastest mode. So you have different mode for different things. So this is fastest mode, so you have to read the things fast. So you and your friend Steven go to the gym for a while. Now to go more efficient, you decide to track your progression. Yeah, different exercise combine weight differently, go to the goal. Different exercise combine weights differently to get to the goal weight unit. Exercise include bench press, added weight plus 20 leg. Don't forget to multiply reason about repetition. So okay, total weight. Okay, so this would be, so it says that bench press plus 20. So BP, P is what? 70, and E is P. Bench press, leg press, and plank. Here, body weight is 0. So we have to find what? Body weight, repetition, exercise type. Okay, added weight 0. Okay, so you do print, so you do body weight plus added weight, right? And then you I think there's different exercise, right? Okay. So what you can do is if E is equal to PV, you can say that you add your body weight, you add your weight, right? Bench press, added weight. Okay, you add your body weight and added weight plus 20, and then you multiply by the repetition, right? By the repetition. So this case would be correct. Is it? So where did I went wrong? So you don't add this one, right? Yeah, so this is correct. And now, so you're getting sense of how I'm doing, right? So this is how you play the game. So now if the exercise is P, which is plank, you do added weight, okay, plus your own body weight, which is this one, and then you multiply by the repetition, this one. You don't multiply because it's just your own body weight. Makes sense? Okay, so don't miss leg day. So for the leg day, if you do, so leg day would be LP, and then you do print, you do added weight plus 47. With this you need with the repetition you need a bra for that chest. And then if you do E equals to chest day, which is what? BP, okay. BP, and you do print, you do added weight plus 20, and then you multiply by the repetition. And you got it. Hey, boom. So that's how you play the game, and you also can share your code to your fellow players to see what the solution is if you want to. It was fun, it was difficult, it was perfect. Statement, it was clear enough. Test case, so it was okay. Yeah, so you can submit and then you can play. So if you want to see my code, you can have a look. Right, boom. Okay, so yeah, it's like that. It's pretty fun, much funner than lead code. So I think my friend is asking me how to do donut chart, so I might gonna help him. I'll be back at the toilet. Donut chart, so I will help him a bit. So with the donut chart, those names are long. He's from the Philippines. Yeah. Yeah, I think he knew. I learned to explain him.
Oh. Bam! So far, we've seen that when the slope of the line is negative, the strongest relationship has correlation equal to -1. And when the slope of the line is positive, the strongest relationship has correlation equal to 1. In both cases, if a straight line cannot go through all of the data, then we will get correlation values closer to 0. And the worse the fit, the closer the correlation gets to 0. And when there is no relationship that we can represent with a straight line, correlation equals 0. When correlation equals 0, a value on the x-axis doesn't tell us anything about what to expect on the y-axis, because there is no reason to choose one value over another. Bam! As long as the correlation value is not 0, we can still use the line to make inferences. But our guesses become more refined the closer the correlation values get to -1 or 1. And just like before, our confidence in our inferences depends on the amount of data we have collected and the p-value. In the left graph, we have very little confidence in the trend because we have very little data and the p-value equals 0.8. In the middle, we have moderate confidence in the trend because we have more data and the p-value equals 0.08. On the right, we have a lot of confidence in the trend because we have even more data and the p-value equals 0.008. Note, the correlation equals 0.3 confidence in the trend because we have more data and the p-value equals 0.0 confidence 0.8. In the middle, we have moderate confidence in the trend because we have more data and the p-value equals 0.08. On the right, we have a lot of confidence in the trend because we have even more data and the p-value equals 0.008. Note, the correlation equals 0.3 in all three examples. In this case, increasing the sample size did not increase correlation. And that means adding data did not refine our guess. All it did was increase our confidence in the guess. Thus, our guesses will probably be pretty bad in all three cases. However, we'll have the most confidence in the bad guess that came from this data. In other words, just because you have a lot of data and you have a lot of confidence in your guess, if the correlation value is small, your guess will still be bad. Double bam! If you know how to calculate variance and covariance, calculating correlation is a snap. Note, If you're not already familiar with the concepts of variance and covariance, check out the quests. The links are in the description below. If this were the data, then the correlation equals the covariance of gene X and gene Y divided by the square root of the variance for gene X times the square root of the variance for gene Y.
It will cancel out.
As we saw in the stat quest on covariance, the numerator can be any value between positive and negative infinity, depending on whether the slope of the line that represents the relationship is positive or negative, how far the data are spread out around the means, and the scale of the data. Thus, when we calculate correlation, the denominator squeezes the covariance to be a number from -1 to 1. In other words, the denominator ensures that the scale of the data does not affect the correlation value, and this makes correlations much easier to interpret. When the data all fall on a straight line with a positive or negative slope, then the covariance and the product of the square roots of the variance terms are the same, and division gives us 1 or -1 depending on the slope. When the data do not fall on a straight line with a positive or negative slope,
I don't understand what he said.
If you know how to calculate variance and covariance, calculating correlation is a snap. Note, if you're not already familiar with the concepts of variance and covariance, check out the quests. The links are in the description below. If this were the data, then the correlation equals the covariance of gene X and gene Y divided by the square root of the variance for gene X times the square root of the variance for gene Y. As we saw in the stat quest on covariance, the numerator can be any value between positive and negative infinity, depending on whether the slope of the line that represents the relationship is positive or negative, how far the data are spread out around the means, and the scale of the data. Thus, when we calculate correlation, the denominator squeezes the covariance to be a number from -1 to 1. In other words, the denominator ensures that the scale of the data does not affect the correlation value, and this makes correlations much easier to interpret. When the data all fall on a straight line with a positive or negative slope, then the covariance and the product of the square roots of the variance terms are the same, and division gives us 1 or -1 depending on the slope. When the data do not fall on a straight line with a positive or negative slope, then the covariance accounts for less of the variance in the data, and the correlation is closer to 0.
What are you saying?
As we saw in the stat quest on
I think I need a break. I don't know what he's saying at all. What time is it? Okay. I think I'll take a break. Don't know what he's saying at all. Take a break. Break. Okay. Shoot. Okay, so it's break.